All right, so I finished my fourth book somehow, and it was for the Bards cell of the bingo. And this one just required you to pick a book with a musician as a main character. So I'm guessing this is one of the more filler cells where um, it's just about reading another book, not so much exploring a new genre. But I suppose that there are lots of fantasy or speculative fiction books where music is a focal point. This is not one of them. The main character just happens to be a musician, and it's important to him as a person, but not so much the book or the story as a whole. Anyways, this is The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, which is the first book in an uncompleted trilogy. I think they call it the King Killer Chronicles. Yeah, it's the first book in the trilogy, but the third one has yet to come out, or so I'm told. But anyways, I think it's a pretty popular trilogy. You can usually tell how popular a trilogy is by like looking at the fandom, or like how popular a fantasy series is by looking at the fandom, right? I was on the fandom because I don't think I plan on reading the second and the third book when it does come out. So I was just trying to see if there were any details I missed. But there's like a lot of fan art of all the different characters, and I don't know. It's like something I've noticed because um, people like to imagine what the characters look like from the words of the book. So yeah, it was pretty cool. So this was a book that my friend recommended to me for the bingo specifically because I was like, I don't really know what to do for the music box. I think I was originally gonna read Soul Music by Terry Pratchett, but Terry Pratchett is always checked out at the library for some reason, and then my school library doesn't have it either. So I was like, yeah, we can read your book, and it was a pretty good book. Um, it's like a high fantasy. I think high is in quotes here because one thing that I did like about it is that a lot of high fantasy books, there is still a distinction, a pretty large distinction between what is magic and what isn't, right? And in low fantasy, this would make sense because there is an inherent separation between what is magical and what is not. But in high fantasy, it can sometimes be kind of weird, right? But in this book, they treat all the things that human beings that we would call magic that don't exist in our worlds as sciences in that world. So there's this thing where like people can link two objects together. They call it sympathy, and you can like link them up kind of like in a voodoo way. So that is a science, and it's taught in the same way. Chemistry is taught, right? It's taught at university, just like all the other subjects like mathematics is or whatever, right? So that was something I found really cool, and they do go in super depth about all these sorts of nuances and kinks of the world, because I mean it's like a 700-page book. It's a huge book, and in those 700 words there's not much else to do except for explain the world really well. So that is something that this book does incredibly well. The author likes to expand upon things like religion, culture, the language, the economy, all that. Like, it does indeed feel like a very grounded world. So yeah, and honestly it's kind of interesting how they incorporated into this, because this book reads like a biography, and actually, it is the frame story where the character is just creating their own biography. So one would think that it may be difficult to provide both the background context alongside what is actually meaningful to the character himself, but just by sheer volume, the book is able to do that. It has enough space to go through both the character and the surrounding world. But I will say that this character, the main character, is more. He grows. My friend put it in a really good way. He grows his skill set. He grows what he can do, what he is as a person, including things like music. But although once again, it's not central to the story, but not so much as a character. So one thing is this guy is super smart. It's not to say that he does not encounter difficulties or challenges, right? He does overcome challenges, but he doesn't really change as a person when he does overcome those challenges. So it's not a sort of novel where the main character is ridiculously overpowered, right? But it is one where you don't, where it feels kind of off, where like these are some pretty serious things that I would think cause some sort of trauma, but he mostly comes out of these situations the same person, except he's learned a few tricks. He knows he's a bit more wiser. But other than that, there is not much like development in that sense, which is not a bad thing. I think the still reads very well as a biography. Like, I think part of how your enjoyment of a book works is what are you expecting from it, and reading the book Like about like 100 pages in, I was like, this is probably going to be like a biography, and I read it as such, and it was a very good one. But this is not to say the book is shallow. I think the book does have a lot of thematic things to say about stuff like stories and culture, but um, you don't have to read into it. Though I'm sure it's there because once again, there are so many words in the book. So just by sheer volume, by the law of large numbers, there will be something for everyone. But perhaps maybe it might be a bit of a slog if you're not ready to learn about the backstory of like every single detail in the book to explain it to you in full detail. So yeah, I don't really think I have much else to say because I read the book in that sort of manner. It was like, it's one of those books where like you're about to go to sleep and you want to rest your eyes because you were on the screen the whole day, and then you just read the book and you accidentally stay up too late because you're too absorbed in the plot, and then you close it and then you read it the next day. So it's one of those kind of books. It's a very enjoyable book. I'd give it like a 7 out of 10. And yeah, he is indeed a musician. He plays the lute, and he's actually very good at the lute because he was like raised by musician or performing arts parents. So yeah, it's a good book. The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. Bonus points because we share the same first name.